On the third Thursday of every month, pastors and church leaders from near and far gather together for a time of friendship, gospel encouragement, and ministry insights in the warehouse at the Axis Church in downtown Nashville. The following is from one such third Thursday gathering.
It's a real honor to be here with you, and not to be pretentious or formal, but this topic, I needed some notes, and so I'm going to try to follow those a little bit because I want to talk about pastors and church workers' mental health. I would have preferred to speak what I was going to speak about the last time I came, or last time I was invited anyway, and on the way on 24, a tanker fell over and blocked the highway for hours, so I couldn't get through all that. I was going to talk about what St. Patrick could offer us in our contemporary times, and but that's an interesting topic. But if you want to look at that, I really recommend the book How the Irish Saved Civilization by Thomas Cahill, which I think is a stellar book. He could have called it How Patrick Saved Civilization, but he didn't. He didn't ask me about it. Anyway, I want to talk about mental health because we have a mental health crisis that's affecting our clergy and other church leaders. I'm going to talk about 15 minutes, and then I want to open up and so that you interact with me and with one another. Let me start out with a recent Barna study. Barna says that as of October 2021, 51% of pastors serving Protestant mainline churches and 34% of pastors serving non-denominationally aligned evangelical churches would like to quit their jobs. And the reason they give are principally two. One, they're too far along in their career to make a decent living elsewhere. And secondly, they can't deal with the guilt of abandoning their calling. So at least for now, these pastors keep moving through the motions of pastoral ministry. Now, I suspect that the numbers of disenchanted pastors would be higher if Barna had only talked with employees serving on our church staffs. Because in most church staffs, they have nearly no voice or any power to act on their own behalf. So that much is conjecture. Your church may have a stellar HR department, and everyone on the church staff may feel absolutely free to voice their challenges and disagreements without fear of recrimination, and I hope that's the case. But what I want to do is to dig underneath these raw statistics and ask, what is going on and what can we do about it? So I've got 5 headings. 1, we have redefined church. 2, we have redefined the pastoral role. 3, we are losing transcendence. 4, many of us struggle with doubts about our faith. And 5, few of us have safe persons with whom we can talk. So I'll repeat those as I go along. The first one is redefining church. Now, various historical Christian expressions have always defined church differently. Baptists and Anglicans and Churches of Christ all been debating for years what constitutes a church. But that's not the kind of differences I have in mind. We probably would differ somewhat in this room about that, but I don't think you'll disagree with what I'm about to say. What I have in mind are the kinds of shifts we've made in the last several decades that have gradually changed our churches into a business, a brand, a political recruitment center, or some other kind of secular gathering. In the name of greater efficiency, which, by the way, we have achieved, our churches are much more efficient places than they were when I began my ministry. We have gradually lost the conviction that the church is meant to be an embassy of heaven or an outpost of eternity or an opportunity to taste of the powers of the world to come. Obviously, our churches continue to talk about Jesus and eternity, but I would argue that the reorganization of our churches around marketing, management, felt needs, or political causes has mutated the essence of church work. And over time, this kind of reorganization has morphed the church into something it has never been before. By the way, you certainly disagree with this later on. That's what I think a gathering like this is for, to kind of sharpen our saw here. But to the extent that that has happened, our stated values then are no longer our actual values. In other words, what we preach on Sunday becomes inconsistent with how we conduct ourselves Monday through Saturday, even on our church staff. Spiritual life ebbs away. Our ethics and morals are no longer presented as evidence to the world that the people of God walk a different path than those who do not follow Christ. Church as business or brand simply strives to succeed. And that mostly means that our church must find ways of drawing in more noses and nickels than the other churches. So the need for better lighting and up-to-date sound and visible connection to the well-connected become obsessions. My point in making those kinds of concerns is that the center of the church has been seriously changing the nature of what church leaders do, which is the second point, a redefinition of the pastoral role. Through the ages, ministers have taken their vows of ordination based mostly on the Apostle Paul's instruction to church leaders. Those values, those vows differed a bit depending on the particular kind of church where the ordination took place, but they embodied a stated desire on the part of the person entering ministry to teach and live in such a way that the transformation of life promised by Christ becomes visible and attractive to the world. The word pastor, of course, means shepherd. You know that. It's not even a different word in many languages. In Spanish, a pastor can be someone that's watching over sheep or someone leading a church, same word. And behind that lies the 23rd Psalm's definition of leadership. The restoration of soul is what that psalm is revolved around. The center of the 23rd Psalm is He restores my soul. And Christ purposefully linked Himself to that psalm by claiming to be the good shepherd. And He calls His disciples to follow Him in that work. And so in the last night with His disciples, He makes a point of that by washing their feet and serving at the table. And in that exchange with the Apostle Peter really underlines this is what it's about. If you don't get this, you don't get it. Pastors and church leaders fail at this, and we always have. But it's always been the goal of church leaders to make Christ known through the spoken word and by modeling the life of Christ through our lives. The alteration of a church into a business, a brand, or political recruitment center requires the church to change the kind of leader they look for. Our priority concern in that case is rarely about whether a leader exhibits a saintly or a wise life. And in extreme cases, we may even settle for a scoundrel if the scoundrel seems to have the gifts that the church needs to grow and expand its brand. And that's not an overstatement. All we have to do is look at all the podcasts and the stuff on TV and all that's cataloging time after time after time when this has occurred in public arena. Now, I'm taking things to the extreme. No church member wants a scoundrel for a pastor, but if what I'm saying is even a little bit recognizable, we are in trouble. I want to suggest that most pastors thinking about quitting are not spiritually marginal or lazy, do-nothing people. Many of them are spiritually hungry. they're biblically centered, and they're compassionate. They entered church leadership because they were called. But what they thought they were called to do has turned out to be not that important in today's world. So there's a crisis, and it's one of the crux of the crisis. 3, a loss of transcendence. One of the most impactful books about the contemporary Western world written in the last few years was Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. And Charles Taylor, for 700 pages, makes the point that the peoples of North America and Northern Europe have gradually dismissed the idea and the experience of transcendence. John Lennon said the same thing in much less words. Imagine above us only sky. Imagine above us only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Whoa, whoa, right? There is a kind of practical agnosticism that can overtake a church and its leaders, including, strangely enough, our worship leaders. And this happens when technique replaces mystery and awe. When church work becomes so smooth and so professional, becomes such a well-oiled machine that it evokes no sense of wonder or even makes room for moments of awe and wonder, we can be forgiven for not treating church any differently than we treat any other human institution. Here's an old Appalachian hymn that puts all this, I think, in context of where we've come from. Brethren, we have come to worship and adore the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power while we try to preach the word? All is vain except the Spirit of the Mighty One come down. Brethren, pray and holy manna will be showered all around. All is vain except the Spirit of the Mighty One come down. Think about that for a moment. Please understand, I'm not trying to ignore the practical needs of contemporary church. I pastored a large church for a long time. I like good lighting and good sound, and I was insistent that we have the best we could. And church work is not about praying and floating around on a cloud all the time. We're human beings serving other human beings in a specific material time and place. If you don't get that, you just got kind of a mystical kind of wish list. You won't get things. But nonetheless, is there anything about church life that opens our soul to the presence of God? Or have we become so intimacy-impaired controllers that there's no possibility that the Spirit of the Mighty One would ever make his appearance among us? Taylor says that Christians, conservative and progressive alike, have lost the notion of transcendence along with everybody else. Could it be that that's the reason why our churches, whether conservative or progressive, have become so politically obsessed? If above us there's only sky, what else could there be other than preoccupation with earthly life? I think that's the reason for our obsession with politics. We don't really believe we're dealing with the powers of the world to come. 4, doubts about the faith. I won't spend a lot of time here, but many church leaders harbor terrifying thoughts that what we represent may not have much objective reality. Christianity, after all, is no longer known for any serious reflection on science or philosophy. We can get passionate about our views on morals and ethics, but we also evoke these in pretty selective ways, or so it seems to the world and even to many of our own children. After 12 decades of revolutions in physics and information sciences, Christianity offers very little guidance about what these things mean or how they compare and contrast to our faith. For the most part, we've been singing together and talking about politics. So what do we say? It's been 120 years now since Einstein and the quantum mechanics guys and all this stuff that's happened. There's a wonderful book called The Modern Mind by Peter Watson, and the subtitle is An Informational History, An Intellectual History of the 20th Century. And 1901, Freud's interpretation of dreams, 1902, the quantum mechanics revolution. He goes year after year, bang, 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 in the sciences and arts and showing how much the world changed. And it's not, your people don't want to hear reflections on that, of course, on Sunday morning. But if you don't have some awareness that that's occurred and that's important, I'll give you an example of this. A lady came to me, and she is an international lawyer, a brilliant woman, and she came to me weeping that she didn't think she could hang on to her faith. And so as I talked to her, she went to her pastor, a good man, I know the pastor, Bible-centered church and all that. And she wanted him to answer some questions that she had about some of these issues, issues of science and technology. And he asked her about her prayer life, and she's like, I'm trying, and blah, blah, blah. There was no engagement with it. He could have said, that's not my expertise, but I will help you find someone. But her questions were utterly dismissed. And she knew that he did not think them relevant. Why didn't he think them relevant? Because for decades, pastoral work has been about making sure we have enough parking spaces and that the lighting is good and the music is relevant. And so we are getting better and better at saying less and less. And we know it. Now, I'm exaggerating a little bit. Francis Collins headed the Genome Project in NIH, and he's an evangelical Christian. And he has written about what the knowledge of DNA and RNA implies about God and creation. And there's many more like him scattered throughout the scientific disciplines. John Polkinghorne, for example, is a pastor and one of the most respected voices in quantum physics. However, voices of Christian thinkers like Collins or Polkinghorne are exceptions, and they must constantly defend themselves not only against the secular world, but against believers as well. Because we are entertaining a kind of a know-nothingism that's being defined as orthodoxy, and it's killing us. In an environment like that, Christian leaders who think and read begin to entertain the reason that Christianity is not saying anything about these contemporary issues, is that our faith has nothing much to say. And weary about talking about good lighting, the church's brand and market share and its targeted audience, many of our most devout church leaders are giving up. And this is a crisis that will not go away. And here's the final one. Nearly all church workers will agree with this, I think. Church work is lonely and often emotionally and vocationally unsafe. Church workers and their families experience the same pressure as anyone else. Our kids develop addictions, for that matter, so do we. We face marriage struggles, we age, we become anxious, we have seasons of sexual frustration that we deal with. We go through bouts of depression. And as I just mentioned, we wonder sometimes if we're not doing what the Apostle Peter said we're not doing, and that is following cleverly devised fables. These conditions affect the most dedicated and sincere church workers as much as they do anyone else. And still, Our job requires cheerfulness, optimism, an unwavering commitment to the beliefs and practices of our faith, absorbing the criticisms of our congregants, surfing the political realities of our church communities, keeping the people happy so they won't change churches, sitting with dying people and still making that early morning appointment, and on and on and on. It's a very demanding job. In some ways, it's not different than a bank worker or a retail store worker, but the difference is that many of us have no private life. And we have no close friend with whom it is safe to share our fears and our angers. As our churches have grown more strident about cultural issues, church leaders cannot afford to have a different opinion than their congregants, or even be uninterested in that struggle. This new accumulating pressure sets up a situation where a church worker that wants to keep his job must learn to be coy, or unfortunately to just say what the congregants want to hear. It's not impossible, but it is challenging for a pastor to find a confidant in the church that he serves. Hard experience teaches us, though, that when the pressure is on, the information will leak. For the most part, co-workers are also not safe confidants. I had a wonderful fortune of having an entirely safe and life-giving relationship with the chairman of our church board in the last church I served, and we're still friends, and I love him deeply. Even in disagreement, he was always a Christian gentleman and entirely ethical, and he did disagree with me on occasion. That's the nature of our work, right? Pastors and church board leaders and all, but we loved one another and esteemed one another. Unfortunately, that's an exception. Far too many pastors have no real friends. Many of them, and more all the time, are lonely, disillusioned, and running on empty. And as Barna discovered, they want out. So let me conclude, and we've got some time to chat about this. I think we need to find ways of our church workers getting competent and confidential help. After a pandemic and a toxic political environment that shows no sign of improving, our pastors know that they cannot please their people, much less the world around us. Neither can they take a path of moderation. Someone told me in a couple elections ago, said, "I demand to know how you're going to vote." I have a right to know that as a church attendee. I'm like, sure. So all kind of people were listening. I said, I intend to vote like every American votes, in a private booth with a private vote. Another lady, like online, says, I demand you tell me your political convictions. And I said, yeah, I'm a Whig. So she must have gone and looked it up. And she come back and she said, that party went extinct in 1834. And so I said, of course, everybody's watching online, right? I said, no wonder I can't find anybody to vote for anymore. But in the light of the changes in church work that I'm talking about here today, there's ever less reason for anyone but a masochist to sign up for church leadership in most of our churches. Something has to change. So what are some of the things that can change? We can love one another. That includes providing a means for the pastors to discharge the trauma of these past few years. I know some of you may feel like it didn't bother me, and I'm glad for you, but some people have really gone through extreme agony. And it's showing up. I mean, I'm seeing 3 days a week. I'm working in a clinic. My secular training is in psychology, and I had my postgraduate studies were in trauma and abuse. So I'm seeing people who are just, they're all over the board. They don't know what's wrong with them. They're here, they're everywhere. And hospitalized a few of them, but most of them, the core of it is they were confined without access to the things that were keeping them diverted for a long time, and now they got to deal with some angst here, and they don't know, they can't voice the concerns that they have, and it's some of the things I've mentioned here, particularly in church work, like, can I really believe in a time like this? I mean, oh gosh, you're not telling anybody, right? This is confidential, like, yeah, and then out it will come, right? We can serve one another, including our cultural adversaries. You can't fight a culture war and love people and intercede for them at the same time. You can have your opinions and you can care about it as a citizen and all that, but if a person next to the church is adversarial in every way to our faith, you can't fight them and love them at the same time. We can also work to recover the sacred, transcendent core of church as an outpost of eternity and the gathering place for the family of God. I know we do this differently, but the sacred core of the church is, I mean, what we have in Anglican tradition, we have kind of a liturgical fundamentalism sometimes of where you didn't wear the right collar to stuff, or that's just utter BS. And I care about the symbolic stuff of all that, and I learn it, and I'll talk to you about it if you're interested. But in the end, if it's not pointing souls to eternity and it's not awakening us in some way, I mean, then it's not really a symbol for anything except pointing to itself, which is another word for idolatry, right? Same with our music, same with anything we do. What we do in church worship is not about pointing to itself. It's a signpost that's supposed to point us upward toward the God of glory and open our soul. We can bring the heat down and make our church a safe place again. As a mental health worker that's been a pastor for my entire adult life, I'll tell you that what I've shared with you today is real, and you know that. But I can tell you these are the sort of things that some of our pastors may not feel safe to reveal to others about the state of his mental health. Indeed, he may not even recognize those things in himself because we've trained him not to for over several generations. We've got to get back to brass tacks, and we got to care for one another. We have to care for our caretakers, and that was my call to you today. Let me hear from you. See what you think. It can be agreement, disagreement, question, whatever.
Pastor, one thing we try to say to each other around our culture is it's okay not to be okay, and we're trying to believe that. So if there's any of us here that are like, okay, I'm not okay, what would your counsel be to do that? Especially if a person's a key leader in the church or a lead pastor, what do they do next?
Get them to someone, and no, I'm glad to interact with you about that. There's other people that can, but the important thing, it has to be someone outside of their environment, just for the safety reasons. You might be completely ready to walk with them and all. And let's say that they've gotten caught up in some kind of behavior that they know's out of control. And they're terrified because lose job, families depending on humiliation. So a counselor can form a plan on keeping them safe as we work. They may need to leave the ministry, for example, for a while. But rather than being punitive, it's therapeutic to say, let's look at these following steps we can take to keep your family safe and ratchet out of your position right now. They just need someone competent. And an important thing also is a lot of really good counselors aren't really aware of specific stuff about church work. And a lot of Christian counselors, with the title of Christian counselor, they're using that really to say I'm a safe person to talk to, and sometimes they're not utterly competent. So you got to dig deeper and to find out are they competent enough, for example, to recognize there might be a mental illness, or to get them to true clinical care, or are they just discouraged, or are they looking for vocational change, or is there family stress? You got to get underneath and find that stuff, and someone has to be able to do that. So get them to a gatekeeper, and there's plenty of places now around the country can do that. One of the things is to call for a denomination that's other than your own, and call to their caretakers and say, can I talk to you about it? I had a Greek Orthodox guy call me in another state and say, would you meet with me? And I said, sure. And I met with him, and I said, you've got some pretty good caretakers in your own community. Like, I'm not going to them. And so, because we know, in the secular world, there's HIPAA stuff, so you can lose your job and get fired and go to jail or whatever for revealing people's stuff. But unfortunately, those same ethics are not always available in pastoral work. Yeah.
This is a follow-up part, maybe a part C for that. Would you, in a perfect world, if you're advising churches on the whole, would you, as part of that next step, like a framework or a structure, how would you associate with find a few clinical trusted groups that you have a formal relationship with, rather than this is happening now, we've got to scramble to find somebody, like where there's a systematic, how would you maybe advise us on, if you had again, perfect world and church,
yeah.
How would you advise to structure that on the whole?
Well, I'll just speak to, we have a 501c3 called the Wilberforce Society, and that's turned out to be our main thing. We are networking to find churches, places of care, competent care. But there's other groups, and we're trying to learn who they are. We're scrambling all through the church world to put together something. But certainly for the people in here, I can help you find that. Yeah.
I don't know if Gordon, if this was what your question was about, but the anti-intellectualism that has been going on, you said for 120 years. You used the example that the pastor kind of just pushed it off. If someone didn't feel comfortable speaking on that authoritatively, whatever the question was, what are the resources that you want people to?
That's a hard one, because many of our communities are inoculated against any serious discussion, and so even the people that you would mention as safe, competent places are already discredited. In broader terms, the genius of our faith and the Spirit of God really leading churches in adapting to the unbelievable challenges of the American frontier and evangelizing the American frontier in such an effective and powerful ways, from, say, certainly mid-1700s to post-Civil War times, making this one of the most Christianized places on the planet, has to be respected and honored. But the trade-off many times was that in a Christianized society, the churches were not carrying the heavy weight of how our faith interacts with the sciences and all. That was not true in the beginning. Like a Jonathan Edwards was a botanist, for example. He's noted for Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God and all that, but he was a noted botanist that made several very important contributions to his field. And so that's been true all through the centuries, that Christianity was a way of viewing the world, including the sciences. And that a Christian who was a scientist often was a clergy person, and they were applying theology to the natural world with the idea that the created universe was God's first book, and then the second book was written because we're fallen creatures and we weren't interpreting correctly. Paul gets in that in Romans 1. So that was but in revivalism of the American frontier, it became the awakening of the heart, and left to others who also usually were Christians in the universities and colleges to deal with the other part of it. But of course, in the secularization of our culture, the gulf opened up then to where the churches were dealing with matters of emotion, and like I just sang the song that kind of says it, but in terms of dealing with serious philosophical questions and all like that, that was not only abandoned, but in many of our communities demonized. So it's an uphill struggle sometimes because, like many people in our churches that are devout believers that are also have secular demanding careers, they're living kind of double lives, not morally and ethically necessarily, but like, what if I'm a computer scientist, what's information theory have to do with Christian faith? Well, a lot actually, but we don't know how to do that. So what does my business career have to do with Christian faith? Well, quite a bit. So we've got to find some way of bridging that gap, and there are resources. I'm coming up with a blank to give you kind of a specific things right now, but it's certainly something to look for. Yeah.
There's a book called The Genius of Jesus by Edward McMahon, which is really good, and he explores how intelligent Jesus was and how to speak to it. So that's a good book. But I don't know if you've struggled with this, but compassion fatigue with people that are in the health field or counselors or even pastors. So I kind of want to know your best practice on how to, combat burnout and compassion fatigue in our field, because many of my pastor colleagues are like, I'm done, and it's hard. So basically, what would you speak to that?
Yeah, I don't know that the Lord intended us to be in kind of professional pastoral roles our entire life without any breaks. That's what I did basically until I retired. But, think about even the apostles. They walked vast distances between these engagements, which time, what are they doing? They're talking to people. This kind of like every single day, day and night, week after week, year after year, focused on stuff of a parish. I just don't think that that was ever the intended model. And so to tell people you're not being disobedient to your calling if you take a break. There's other things you can do, might be parallel things. I actually I took a second master's in psychology, and then I was mentoring, and then I interned and went through because I was going to be a psychologist and leave pastoral ministry. Didn't turn out that way many years ago. But then I retired Christ Church, it wasn't very long before the pandemic began, and the state of Tennessee wrote anybody that ever been into mental health care, asking you to come back, and they give you your license for the duration of the pandemic. And mostly they needed people to help with hospital workers, doctors, nurses, and lab people and all that are burning out, and they wanted to send them, get care. So I thought, well, this is a calling. I can do this, and so I signed up to do it 3 days a week, and I continue to do that. I don't know that I'll continue, but seeing people that in healthcare that were just utterly into the hours, the unbelievable hours. And then if they were Christians, unfortunately, in our area, sometimes they're being harassed in their church for giving competent care and harassed on, how can you believe in the kind of applications of how medicine has been changing since the Genome Project in the late 90s, which is where our RNA vaccine process began. And, medical people knew that was already in work, but thought it would be some time before we began to see the practical stuff. But in the pandemic, nations of the world poured tons of money in, and so it just accelerated. And so the RNA approach went quickly out, and it scared everyone. I mean, there were a lot of people. So our healthcare people couldn't take time to explain what the science was behind this, and they got harassed and harangued for being like Antichrist instead of being healers and helpers. And so a lot of them like, I'm not going to church right now because I don't want to be harassed. And now I'm working day and night, and I'm just collapsing here. So that's kind of the compassion fatigue that you're referring to. Anyone else? I don't want to hold you past your time.
I just appreciate your words, Pastor Dan, and the way that you share them, and the gift that you are to so many. I'm probably seven months into depression myself, and seeing a professional therapist. I was with more of a coach counselor for a while, and this person was really gifted at discovering, digging up problems, but never really offering any solution of what to do with it. And so I exited every session with more weight and confusion, and I think that really escalated the depression. And so I went to the staff, gosh, I don't know, probably 3 months ago, something, and maybe not knowing any better, I just said I'm in depression, and wanted them to know so they could be praying and supporting and understanding kind of where I'm coming from. And our staff is very supportive, and but I just have walked in the light with that, for better or for worse, and sort of 1 John 1, just hoping to walk in such a way that the enemy thrives in darkness, and just as much as I could, with as much awareness as I had, just letting the people know, and speaking to it just briefly here and there on Sundays in my sermons, when applicable, without it becoming group therapy. But just so they know kind of where their pastor's at, and that's been helpful. But also having a gifted therapist is huge. And I think a lot of guys are intimidated by the process of having to shop around for a therapist. Because if you're not with a good one,
Yeah.
you need to find a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And I'm thankful for this. This Sunday, after I preach, I start a 6-week sabbatical. That's very timely. And but it's just been something like this, all that you said is like resonates deeply, and just for where I'm at. Right? So
Yeah,
I appreciate you.
and also you can find a competent therapist or psychologist that you don't really still connect with. It's just a personality gap, and you can say that. You can say, I see that you're very competent and all, but somehow the chemistry's missing for me, and I need, and they'll help you, or are supposed to. Yeah. I had a church worker a few months ago come in and just break down and weep and say, I think I've become an alcoholic. And they were in a place where no one drinks, So I said, okay, how do you know you're becoming an alcoholic? Well, I've made myself a daiquiri every night. I said, for how long? 2 weeks. I said, you're not an alcoholic. It's good for you to recognize you don't need a daiquiri every night, but you're not an alcoholic. You're trying to cope. What else is going on? And as I talked, nothing. That was the problem. It's like, something's got to give, something's got to give. Well, something will give. But this person was right to come in and say, I could be having an issue, and I want to be careful, not going any further. That's fine. You could talk about that. But basically, we have the added thing, many of us, from coming from backgrounds where there's that over-scrupulosity, constantly I've sinned in thought, word, and deed, but things I've done, things I've left undone, and it goes on, and so we can't escape from that. We preach grace to others and apply law to ourselves. So, that's where we can actually be a help sometimes, just to hear someone and saying, I think you're just discouraged, or I think you're just hurting, and this is normal stuff, but you could use a therapist. Because a person that's never experienced depression or something like this can think they're in much more serious trouble than they are, but they're still right to get help. Well, thank you very much. Wonderful to be with you today, and thank you for your very kind receptivity.